So everybody, welcome to this session on reusing ideas and content. So for those of you who don't know me from last time, I'm Jen de Beyer. I work for the UK Equator Centre at the University of Oxford. So just so you know a little bit about who I am and how I got here, I did a DPhil PhD in biochemistry at the University of Oxford. And after doing that, I moved into academic copy editing, first privately and then for a team of medical statisticians, which is where I am now. And I teach academic writing skills. So I mentioned the UK Equator Centre. We're part of the Equator Network, an international organization aiming to enhance the quality and transparency of health research by improving the quality of health research writing. Had anybody here heard of Equator before coming along to the session? Who here had heard of Equator? This is looking like we're new to many of you, which is fantastic. So Mohammed, yes. Asel, no. Balkis, yes. Excellent. So for a few of you, this is going to be new, which is fantastic. We love reaching new audiences. So the Equator Network, basically all of the research that you do is based on existing literature. So by improving how people write about their research today, we're ensuring better quality research tomorrow. We do this in three ways. We raise awareness of tools called reporting guidelines, which are these amazing checklists to help researchers remember all the important details for their articles. We host a website filled with resources on academic writing, including all of the reporting guidelines available for human research. And we offer education and training, which is why I'm here today. And a huge thank you to Cancer Research UK, whose funding supports the UK Equator Centre's program of research and training. So reusing ideas and content. And before I get going, just to let you know, if I'm ever talking too fast or too slowly, or I get skipped over with connection, let me know in the chat. I've got the chat open. I'll be keeping an eye on that. So let me know if there are any issues and I can repeat anything. So when you're reading other people's work, often you'll find something absolutely perfect for the thing that you're working on, and you'll want to reuse their content and ideas inside your own articles. But there are rules that we need to follow to make sure that we're doing this both ethically and legally. So from the legal side, we need to think about copyright and copyright infringement. And from the ethical side, we need to think about plagiarism. So before we get going, just to make sure I'm aiming this at the right level and I'm aiming this towards what you need, what are your thoughts and worries about reusing ideas and content? So what are the things that when you read about this session and you thought, yes, I need this session in my life, I'm coming along, what is the big questions that you were hoping that we discuss? What are the things you'd really like to cover today? Pop it in the chat and I'll give you a moment. So what are folks' thoughts and worries? So Ayub, how can I rewrite something without falling into the plagiarism zone? Ooh, Sawa, wanting to avoid plagiarism. Eliana, when I'm citing from other articles, to what extent are we allowed to use their sentences? Natalie saying, I'm always worried about whether rewording what the original work is considered plagiarism. And Balkis, I'm worried about plagiarism. I want to understand it better. Great. Thank you for sharing, everybody. Peter, I want to learn what's legally and ethically usable from sources. Fantastic. Anyone else? These are some really good questions and worries that we're going to try and deal with. And what I'll do is throughout the whole session, if you feel like I'm touching on one of your worries and I'm not going into enough depth, just let me know in the chat and we can dig a little deeper. And hopefully, I think we're going to be touching on most of these, which is great. Odai, the acceptable percentage for quotation to be used from other sources. Awesome. So I think we're going to touch on a lot of these things, which is great. But yes, as I said, I'll check in with you at the end as well. And we can always have a bit of a serious conversation. We can always take ourselves off record at the end if we want to have a little bit more of a conversation about your specific instances as well. I've left quite a bit of time for conversation in this session. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing, everyone. So I'm going to cover first defining plagiarism and copyright, because I think it's helpful to always know we're on the same page with what things mean. I'm going to talk a lot about how to reuse other people's content safely, which links in with quite a lot of what you've been asking about. What's an acceptable amount to use and how do I reuse? And then we're going to talk about reusing other people's ideas, which is that sense that you're asking about how do I reword, how do I reuse in a way that's not just plagiarism? And we're also going to talk about this concept of accidental plagiarism, which none of you brought up, which is great, but hopefully it'll come in and it might touch where some of you are worrying as well. So a quick disclaimer, I have to say this, I am not a copyright lawyer, and I'm going to be giving very simplified descriptions that won't apply precisely in every country. So nothing that I'm saying is constituting legal advice. If you're at all ever unsure, particularly if you need to reuse content for a commercial use, please chat to a librarian or copyright specialist. But most of what I'm saying, I'm going to err on the most conservative side possible, where a copyright specialist or librarian can maybe help you find the gray areas. So yes, not legal advice, but hopefully we can help each other find sort of a good middle ground. So plagiarism and copyright. Basically, plagiarism and copyright infringement are both theft. They're both stealing something from somebody else. So that's bad. We want to avoid both of those things. Plagiarism is using somebody else's words, images, or ideas and not crediting them. So as long as you say where you got an idea or a quote or an image from, you're not plagiarizing. So that's that line. Credit, not plagiarism. No credit, plagiarism. Copyright is a little bit different. Copyright is a creator's legal right to their intellectual property. So it's a legal thing, whereas plagiarism, we're talking about an ethical thing and a moral thing. Copyright covers how an idea is expressed, not the idea itself. So you can't copyright a concept, you can't copyright knowledge, but you can copyright the way something is said, so how you explain a particular piece of information. So the words I am saying now in the order that I am saying them now, that is copyright. So copyright covers anything written. So literary works like articles and books and plays and poems and a thesis, all of those things are copyright. Anything that's recorded, so things like movies and choreography and musical compositions and sound recordings and radio and television broadcasts, all fall under copyright. All artwork, paintings, drawings, sculptures, photographs, any of those things, copyright. And all software and code is also under copyright. So everything is automatically copyright, all rights reserved, even if it doesn't say so, or at least that is in my understanding, particularly in the UK and the US situations. You don't need to register your copyright. It's automatically there. So if you don't see anything written, if you don't see that little C in a circle, you have to assume it's there unless you see explicitly the other way around. And the rights for copyright include copying, so making a copy of something, sharing a copy of something, so giving it to somebody else, and creating derivative works. And we'll talk a lot about this concept of derivative works as we go through. So we infringe on somebody else's copyright when we use their words or their images without proper permission. So words or images without permission. But ideas are not copyright. So you can cause plagiarism with ideas, but not copyright. So you can see here, if I'm going to give credit, I'm covered under plagiarism, but I need permission to make sure I'm covered under copyright infringement. Those are my two things that I have to think about always. So that's what plagiarism and copyright are. And I'm seeing no questions in the chat, which is great. But yeah, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. I'm watching it the whole time. So how does that actually apply to us? Right? These are quite theoretical concepts. How does this actually touch us when we want to reuse stuff? Content, not ideas, content. Mariam, please speak more slowly. Sure, let me know if you need me to repeat any of that. So reusing other people's content. So we need to think about copyright and plagiarism. We've got both of those things the whole time. So we need to check if we have permission, if we need permission from the owner of the copyright. And if we need permission, we need to go and get it. And then we need to credit. We need to acknowledge where we got the work. So we have those two things we need to do. Let's start with permission. Are we allowed to do the thing we want to do? Let's start there. So we've said that copyright covers making copies, sharing those copies, so giving them to somewhere else, whether in person on a piece of paper or through the internet, and also creating a derivative work. So an example of a derivative work that we might bump into a lot would be finding a nice image in a journal article and then using it in our review article, right? So any of these things you can't do without permission if the thing is under copyright. And we've said it's automatically under copyright. right? So we can't do any of these things without permission. But a lot of creators and authors choose to waive some of these rights. They choose to say, I am letting everybody have permission to do something. You don't have to get in touch with me. I'm giving you permission. And a lot of times, particularly in academia, that's done using something called the Creative Commons licenses. Have folks bumped into the Creative Commons licenses before? I'm seeing a no from Natalie. Awesome. Anybody else? Is this new for you? Creative Commons licenses. Let's see in the chat. Who's bumped into these before or used them before? Ayub, it's new. Cool. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to go, Eliana's also new to you. Great. Asel, it's new. Great. Let's go into lots of details. So while it's new, Balquis, fantastic. Okay, so then it's definitely worth us really digging into this a little bit slowly. And as always, I'm going to give you summaries and I'm going to be pointing you back to the website to go and have a little bit of a look afterwards because I can't do it justice and I can't go into enough detail. So Creative Commons licenses are basically, instead of every single time somebody writing at the bottom of their article, copyright me, but everybody is allowed to share this with their friends, or but everybody is allowed to do this every single time in their own words, Creative Commons put together a set of licenses that are things people tend to want to be able to say. So folks go, oh, I'm totally happy for everybody to use my photographs in their own personal stuff, but I don't want them to ever sell it. And they were always writing that at the bottom of their photo. Now you can just use Creative Commons. So what does it mean? Creative Commons, the most open license that maybe you've seen is called the CC0 or the public domain license. And that means I waive all of my rights. All of my rights I say I don't want, including my right to attribution, which means I'm saying that if I put a CC0 on my document or my photograph or my music, I'm saying to you, have fun. You can copy it, you can share it, you can use it in something else you're making, you can even sell any of those things. Fine. You don't have to ask me for permission. And in fact, you don't even have to say, I made the original thing. That's what CC0 means. From an academic perspective, and from a perspective of just the way we work, it's still nice if it's appropriate for your use to still say where the thing come from. I really like it. So you'll see all of my photographs have a little image credit at the bottom. And it actually comes from a website that says I don't have to say where I got the image. I don't have to, but they strongly recommend it. And I like doing that to say, thank you, creator, for having given me the right to use this photograph. So that's something to think about. And also, particularly from an academic perspective, even if something is CC0, public domain, and you don't have to say who made it, you don't want to make it to pretend like you did make it. That's starting to feel a bit like plagiarism, right? So from the public domain bumping into plagiarism from an ethical perspective starts getting interesting. So if you can credit, definitely credit. So that's CC0. The license that's most common in academia at the moment, that I think is really the one that we seem to all be choosing, is called CC BY, or attribution only. Attribution means say that I made it. So if you license a piece of work, CC BY, then you're saying that everybody can do whatever they want. They can copy it, they can share it, they can use it in a derivative product, and they can even sell all of those things. But they can only do that if they make really, really clear where the original thing came from. So at the bottom of every time is saying, I've made this copy, but it comes from that person. I made this thing, it comes from that person, and saying where it comes from. So that's CC BY, and you'll see that a lot on academic articles. So if you look at the bottom of academic articles, you'll see this little license put there. Either it'll be the little C in a circle, or you'll see this double C, and it'll have the little symbols. Awesome. So that's CC BY. There's also a bunch of elements that get put with that CC BY. So one of them is SA, which means share alike. So CC BY SA license, attribution and share alike license, means that you can do whatever you like with the work, provided, again, we've got the BY, so that means got to attribute, but also the SA means any derivative work you make has to also be licensed under that same license. So you're basically saying it starts getting a little bit tricky for people to sell your stuff because it's then been licensed that it can be used again. So it's a way of keeping everything public domain, effective, well, not public domain, but like open access. So that's the CC BY-SA. We don't tend to see that one so much in academia. I don't think I've ever seen a journal use this. The other one that you'll bump into a lot is the NC designation, which means non-commercial. So a CC BY-NC license means you can do whatever you like with the work again. So you can copy, share, distribute, create derivatives. You have to say where it comes from. And also this time, you can't use it within commercial products. So you can't, commercial is funny, and I can't give a good definition for that here. It goes beyond the scope of what I understand. Sell, money exchanging hands is a thing, but even if something is free, doesn't mean it's not necessarily not commercial. And even if something changes hands, money changes hands, it's not necessarily commercial as far as I understand. But generally, a journal article is a commercial product because journal articles get bought. So there's that. So if you're using it in a journal article, that counts as a commercial product. So if something is licensed CC BY NC, you can't automatically use that thing in a journal article. Fab. And then the last one is the ND designation, which means non-derivative. And a CC BY ND license, non-derivative. So I'm sure you can all guess what's going to happen here. You are allowed to share and copy the work. You've got to say where it comes from, but you can't make any derivative products, right? So you can't use that, definitely can't use that in a journal article. So those are the licenses. Those are very quick summaries. I'd suggest visiting the Creative Commons website. They give really nice definitions of all of these licenses. And just so we can see whether folks are on the same page, I've got a little exercise for you. I would like you to match the license on the left-hand side, the numbers, to the descriptions with the letters. So which one does 1 go with? Which one does 2 go with? Figure that out and then pop it in the chat, the 5 links. I'll give you all a moment to do that now. Awesome. So that's exactly what I've got here. So 1 is C, 2 is E, 3 is D, 4 is B, and 5 is A. Fantastic. Awesome. So hopefully that was useful. I do encourage you to go back to those Creative Commons licenses and have a look if you are wanting a little bit more detail on those. They're very interesting. So if you're thinking of then using something, what do you need to do? Do you need permission? First, figure out exactly what your reuse is. Are you just making a copy? Are you sharing copies with friends? Are you making derivative products? And actually for us, we're almost entirely making derivative products when we're using bits in our articles. And then check the copyright license to see if it allows your kind of reuse. And if it doesn't, you're going to need permission. Except, I'm sorry, there's another legal thing we have to talk about. There's this thing called an exception, right? There's a thing called an exception, because by now you might be going, ooh, do I need to ask permission for everything, even a quote? Goodness me. No, there is some exceptions. So copyright exceptions exist for all of these different sorts of reuse, depending on what we're going to do. So for things like private study or non-commercial research, for things like criticism, for review, for reporting on the news, for teaching, for parody, for commentary, those things do fall under a copyright exception. However, that copyright exception is not a blanket, now you get to do whatever you like. Oh, I'm teaching, so it's fine. No, it's not fine, unfortunately. So we then still have to think a little bit deeper. The copyright exemptions, you still, 1, definitely need to acknowledge the creator. And 2, your use has to be something called fair dealing or fair use, usually, with most of those exceptions. There's some other ones which are, in general, don't have this fair use, but they wouldn't really apply to what we're talking about today. So fair use is, unfortunately, this is where I'm going to say you need a copyright lawyer if you're going into this in great detail. It's not explicitly defined, and it needs to be argued in each case. So you're thinking about things like whether your use affects the copyright owner's market, and whether you're using a reasonable amount for the thing you're using. So there's a really big difference between quoting a couple of lines from a journal article in your review and quoting an entire poem, right? So those are quite different things. Now, in terms of that, if you are doing something that's a little bit out there, you definitely need to talk to a librarian or an institution or your publisher if you're at all concerned about whether your use falls under fair use. So your universities will have someone you can talk to. This is very dependent on your country context. However, in the vast majority of cases. If you are using a couple of sentences in a journal article, in a review article, that's going to generally fall under fair use and you don't need to worry about it. So it's more, are you taking whole things? Are you taking whole poems? What are you doing? But yes, have a look. Your university will have a very clear explanation, particularly for teaching, as to how you're allowed to use things. But yes, talk to a specialist. Don't take this as legal advice. So if you've checked everything and what you want to do is not explicitly allowed and there isn't an obvious exception, right? So you want to actually use like whole figures or tables from a journal article, and that article doesn't explicitly let you do it, great, you're going to need to do something now. You need to ask for permission. Aude, taking a scale from another study and modifying it. Awesome question. A lot of scales, it will depend very much on whether that is a concept, like a knowledge, or whether it's the idea, or whether it's actually the how they've written it. So if you're using their materials, as in like their actual physical scale, quite often that will fall under copyright. And you'll need to get in touch with the authors of it to ask them about permission to use it. Yeah. In some cases, they will have explicitly made those things available, but it depends very much on, is it the intellectual content is it the way it's written that's important, the wording, and quite often with scales and with questionnaires, that is the case. It's the wording that's important, or is it the idea? Because you can't copyright an idea, you can copyright the way the idea is written down. Awesome. Bara, can I use a search strategy from another review? So again, depends what you mean by use. So using something for your research, totally fine, right? The problem is when you end up publishing it, whether you end up writing about it and sharing it. So that's where you're going to need to talk to people. And also, yeah, so it's again, does it count as the idea, or does it count as the way it's written down that's important? I hope that helps. If you need to request permission for reusing, there's usually a link on journals websites right next to the article, and you just click on a button that says get permissions. If there isn't one, you can email creators directly and journals directly. You need to then be really clear about what you want to do and what you want to use. So whether it's text or a figure or two, what you want to actually reproduce in your article that you're going to publish. And then they'll let you know how much it will be, if anything. So sometimes there's a cost involved and sometimes there isn't. Yeah. Just as a note, this also applies for any images you find on the internet. So just because you can see something doesn't mean you have permission to use it. So for instance, like, are you grabbing screenshots of my work now, and then are you sending them on WhatsApp to your friends? That's technically breaking copyright, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you can. So it's something to think about always. I mean, in this case, I'm totally fine with you doing that. Go for it. But yeah. So once you're sure that you're allowed to use something the way you want to, then you need to make sure that you are acknowledging the use really clearly when you publish it, when you put it out there. So let's say that I find an excellent image in an article that I want to use in my article. Okay, so I copy it exactly into my article. Fabulous. What do I need to do to make sure I am not committing plagiarism? What do I need to do? I've copied the image directly into my article. I've written my caption. My caption says anatomy of an apple. What do I need to do now to make sure I'm not committing plagiarism? Audi, I mentioned the source, Merriam, a citation. Exactly. So I need to say exactly where I got it from. I've got to say reproduced from Doe et al. In 1990. I've got my full citation there. Fabulous. Now I've sorted out plagiarism, but what about copyright? So in this case, what do I need to do with copyright? What do I need to do? Do I need to tell anyone I've got permission? Is my citation good enough? Or do I need to add something? Balquiz, I should put it in. Yeah, I should put in the copyright. So in this instance, it's a fully copyright held by the publisher, the fruit publisher. Awesome. So now into my caption, I'm actually going to put that. I'm going to say that it is copyright the fruit publisher and I'm using it with permission. I'm going to put that. And I will have permission in writing. So you want to have your permissions in writing always. So if you're publishing a review article, the journal that you're publishing with will want you to have clear permissions for everything that you want to reuse in that article from other sources. Okay. What if instead the article that I am taking it from is actually published under a CC BY license? So it's the authors have waived a lot of their rights. CC BY, we said that's attribution only. What do I need to do now? What needs to go into the caption? I've just said anatomy of an apple. Is that enough? Or do I need to do something more? Balquiz, citation. Yes, exactly. I still need to put the citation in. Reproduced from Doe et al., Fruit 101. Awesome. What do I need to do still? Do I need to do anything else? Yeah, Mahmoud, right? I've mentioned the author. Mahmoud, I've mentioned the author, exactly. So I've got that, but what else do I need? Is this enough? So I've got the citation. I've done my plagiarism due diligence, tick. What about the copyright? So Balki is saying, yes, it's enough. It's actually not enough. And this is the thing why I wanted to mention it, because sometimes we don't realize. We've actually got permission in writing because the author wrote CC BY on their article. So in the same way as I had to say that I got permission last time, I need to say why I'm allowed to reproduce it here. So I need to say that it was published CC BY 4.0, and that's how I know, right? So I need to still put what the copyright license is every time. Cool. So every time stating where it comes from and then stating what my permission is to use it. So Aude is asking, the reviewers of the journal should advise the author, the researcher, if there's any violation of copyright issue, or is it the responsibility of the researcher? Good question. And it's actually one of those things where I think it's both. Journals will try and be very careful. They will tend to pull you up. But on the other hand, they won't know if you've copied something from somewhere else unless you've said so. So if you have plagiarized, they actually won't know that there's a copyright issue. They will find out, like someone will find out always. So you've actually got a bit of an issue there. Journals and publishers tend to be very conservative in my experience. They tend to want more permission rather than less permission. But yeah, in general, it's your responsibility as well. So it's one of those team responsibilities. They will be doing a lot of checking because they don't want to get sued. But also it's your responsibility to try and find these things out as well. So it's a shared responsibility. Right, so let's go back to our copyright version. Now I'm going to do something to my figure. Like, I like this figure, I've copied and pasted it, but it's not like exactly right for me. So maybe I make some changes. I'm going to rub out a couple of things and maybe add some labels. Okay, do I need to do anything else to my caption? My caption still says anatomy of an apple. What do we think? Am I okay with my caption? Right, so we've got Aude saying I've got to modify from and mention the source. Mahmoud is saying I don't need to do anything. Right, so Mariam saying modified, yeah. Mohammed saying edited from, yeah. So I do need to cite the citation, exactly. I do need to say where that came from. The only difference is now I say adapted from instead of reproduced from. Yeah, Ileana, still mention the source and make sure if it's allowed derivative works. Exactly, that's the whole answer, perfect. So we still need to do that, and I still need to make sure that I'm allowed to do it, right? I still need to make sure I'm allowed to because I'm still building on their work and I'm changing it. I'm not making masses of changes. I am using their thing as my first base. I'm just making like tiny changes to it. So yes, I need to say it's adapted from, so I'm covering myself for plagiarism, and I need to still have permission from the copyright holder. Because as we're saying, we're using the thing itself, not the idea behind the thing. So the copyright applies. So yeah, got that permission in there. What about quoting text? So when you're quoting small bits of text from journal articles, as I've said, this for review purposes, in general, you're going to probably fall under fair dealing. You're maybe quoting half a sentence or a sentence. You're probably not going to need permission. Again, if you are ever publishing, say, a book and you're using things like lines from poems or lines from other books, I have seen publishers ask for written permission for even that. But within journals, I've not seen for that for with individual like lines from another journal article because it's considered a little bit differently. But as always, you can always check in with the journal as well and see whether they're happy. But yeah, in general, a line or two from another journal article, provided you make it very clear, you probably won't need permission. But you do need to make sure you're acknowledging, right? We do not want to plagiarize. We do not want to plagiarize. So I've got a phrase that I would like to use, a sentence that I'd like to use from that article. Apples are the greatest fruit ever. I want to use that. I want to use it verbatim, word for word from them. That means I put quotation marks around it and I put the citation. there we go. I'm covered. It's very clear. These are not my words. They are somebody else's words. I can do it that way as a standalone sentence, or I could also thread it into a sentence and say, Doe et al. Found that apples are the greatest fruit ever. Again, I have put the words that are their words into quotation marks. And this amount of text is generally going to be fair dealing, right? Unless like there are instances where it wouldn't be. If it is like the sentence that means that no one will buy the original work, if you've pulled the one perfect sentence and no one will ever read the original work again, then it's not fair dealing. But for the most part, for journal articles and review articles, yeah, that's not going to be the case. So that's what I can do with my text. That's all I have to do. And then it's not plagiarism, and I'm making it very, very clear. So that's when I'm reusing other people's content. But actually, for most of us, what we're doing a lot of the time is we are using other people's ideas. So we are building on existing knowledge. So say you've seen an awesome figure, and now you want to use it as inspiration for your own figure that you draw yourself. Do you need permission to do this? Mohammed, so Asel saying no, Mariam maybe no, Eliana no, Mahmoud no. Yeah. So the reason I wouldn't need permission here, this is very obviously, I am not using the way they express the information. I'm using the idea. Exactly, Eliana. I'm just using the idea. Copyright is how an idea is expressed. It's not the idea itself. So this use is definitely not falling under copyright. Then the question is, do I need to credit the original drawing? And that really depends. If it's really generic knowledge, like a well-known chemical pathway, you probably don't need to give credit, right? Because who is the original person that you would credit? Everybody's done it over and over. But if the idea is the special thing, then give the credit, say inspired by, right? And when in doubt, give credit. It costs you nothing and it gives the other person everything. A credit is our academic currency, so when in doubt, give credit. And we start getting a little bit of a gray area. If you take an image and you trace it and you make one that's absolutely identical, depending on what the image is, you might start falling under needing permission. So that is one of those things that's a little bit, just because you didn't copy paste it, if you literally went over it exactly line by line, there's arguments either way. So it's again going to depend on the image and how obviously unique it is. What about using ideas that you find in text? And that's where most of us are going to start having things happen. We're using ideas. So I've got my silly example from before. We've read a statement by these folks and they've said apples are the greatest fruit ever. And I'd like to use this idea. What if I just write apples are the best fruit of all in my work? I'm using different language. So I've not put quotation marks. Is this okay? What do I need? So Mariam, I'm paraphrasing. Yep, I'm definitely paraphrasing. But am I okay? What else do I need? Citations. Yes, exactly. Loads of you are saying citations. Exactly. Obviously, right? I can't just say that. I'm passing their idea off as my own. I have to make it really clear that it's their idea. Doe et al. Claim that apples are the best fruit of all. Now, obviously, this is a really silly example. If an idea is generally known, you don't need to credit somebody. The sky is blue is a generally known fact, no credit needed. So there is a point at which things don't need credit. And for your field, it will be very dependent on your field, what counts as an established fact from wherever and ever and ever. We don't really need to say where gravity comes from, right? We don't need a citation from that. But depending on what you're investigating, you may very well need to start citing some things about gravity because that's what you're studying. So it's very dependent for you. And the extent to which you need to paraphrase, that's where things start getting a little bit tricky. Folks like, oh, do I need to just use one word or another word? Let's get into that a little bit. So avoiding accidental plagiarism. Avoiding accidental plagiarism. Has anybody worried about this idea of accidentally plagiarizing before? Has anybody ever worried about that? And if you do, why are you worrying about it? What is the thing that makes you think I might be accidentally plagiarizing? Yes, I'm seeing lots of yeses. Okay, so I'm going to try and come up with some strategies to make sure that you won't worry. Why are you worrying that you will accidentally plagiarize? Because it's a very interesting word when you put that accidental, and there's a lot of folks who worry about this. Why do we worry that we're going to accidentally plagiarize? What do you think is going to happen when you're writing? Hassam's talking about rejecting your paper on research examples. I'm not sure what you mean. You might need to rephrase that for me. I'm sorry. Valkyries is saying, oh, well, what if I miss an article from the literature? That's a big worry. Folks really worry about that. Yeah. What are other folks worrying about? Sometimes I read something somewhere and I forget where did I read it, so I can't cite it. Ooh, yes. Anybody else feel that too? Yeah. Okay. So sort of the three big ones that I hear a lot of are, Mariam, there's some concept that all researchers who write about the same idea use it. Ooh, unwanted repeating, Maha. Fantastic. I think you've now all hit on a diet similarity. You've now all hit on the three big ones that I want to bring up. So sometimes we worry that we're going to forget to credit or rephrase a copy paste. So we've got these ideas from elsewhere, and maybe I forget where they came from, and maybe I copy pasted a chunk of text. Oh dear. Um, what if I'm using similar language or keywords to the field? And what if I accidentally plagiarize? Just I'm writing from scratch, but what if I accidentally write the same way as somebody else? People worry about that. And then the other one people worry about a lot is not knowing somebody already had an idea. So I think something's brand new and actually it's well-known information, or I think something's brand new and somebody else has had the same idea. Okay. So let's break each of those down. First up, this idea of, oh, I'm going to forget to credit somebody, or I'm not going to remember where I read something. So does anybody else feel this sort of situation applies to them? So you're reading a paper and you come across a really great sentence or paragraph, and then you think, this is perfect for my review. This is perfect for what I need to know for my DPhil, for my PhD, for my master's. And so what you do is you copy paste it into a document and you keep reading, or maybe you don't keep reading. Now you do a little bit of paraphrasing and a little bit of editing, right? Now, if that's you, stop. Wait, this is how things get a little bit difficult. So first of all, the moment you copy paste or the moment you take a note, add in the credits straight away as you're working. Always, always, always add those credits in, because we're human. We forget where we read something. So every time you read something that you go, oh, this is really cool, and you write it down, immediately put that citation in. Immediately have that document next to you the whole time. That will save yourself. So future you will thank past you so much for that little help, right? The other thing that I think can really, really help is just avoiding the copy paste. Avoid the copy paste entirely. So the next time that you're reading a paper, try this instead. You get to that awesome phrase, don't write anything down yet. Keep reading the whole paper, read the whole paper, and then put it down. And then have a little moment and think to yourself and say, what is the thing that I want to take away from this paper? And think it through. And then in your own words, summarize the paper in your own words, out of your own head. And as you're doing that, you're going to be writing it based on this paper. So immediately add in the citation into those notes, immediately add in the citation, because we're helping future us. That's giving them proper credit. But also, what's really wonderful about doing this is that you find that what you're reading has inspired you to make connections between different things, and you end up with new ideas coming out. And those are your ideas. They're you, right? You don't have to cite anyone because they're yours. And writing from scratch instead of copy pasting really helps from this, because as we write, we make connections and we pull things together that we didn't know we knew. So let yourself do that. Well, as soon as we copy paste and then effectively paraphrasing is editing someone else's words, it's not worth it. Don't do that. Not worth it ever. Write in your own words every time. Yes, sometimes you might go, okay, I don't have like a massive vocabulary yet in my field. I feel like I'm writing really clunky or really small words, and I feel a little bit funny about it. It's practice. So the more you practice, the better. You're reading all that words, you're building up the vocabulary. Let yourself practice. Let yourself really sink into the words and write from scratch. It will build so much more towards your research thinking, your academic thinking, and your academic writing. It's how you build that muscle. And I'd love to hear from you. How else do some of you avoid copy paste problems? Do you also write from scratch? Do you have other strategies? Ayub says they run their work through a plagiarism checker, and it's really helpful. Um, I'm glad that it's really helpful for you. Some folks might find the plagiarism checker a little bit anxiety provoking for the next worry that folks have. So if you run your work through plagiarism checkers, you don't need to do that if you write from scratch. I promise you do not need to do it if you write from scratch. If it gives you a little bit of confidence, awesome. If it gives you anxiety, don't worry, you don't need them. Does anyone have any other strategies that they want to share? Balquiz, could I know the right plagiarism checker? Balquiz, to be honest, I know nothing about plagiarism checkers, and I feel like they are super, super unhelpful. I have, so I've worked with a lot of folks from very different language backgrounds, and I find first language speakers never worry about this. It's only the second language speakers who worry about it. And it's not fair because the first language speakers are doing the same thing as the second language speakers. They are reading a bunch of stuff and then they're writing in their own words together, right? And the second language speaker is worried for some reasons we will talk about in a moment. And the first language speaker never thinks to worry about it. So I want to take this worry away from you. It's a burden that I don't like that folks have. So plagiarism checkers, they're not that helpful. If you never copy paste, honestly, Balquiz, do you ever copy paste chunks of text? If not, you don't need a plagiarism checker. I promise. Because you can't accidentally plagiarize. You know, there's that ridiculous saying that if you put 1,000 monkeys in with typewriters and you let them type for 1,000,000 years, eventually they'll write Shakespeare. None of us are writing enough that will accidentally write somebody else's words. So using similar language and keywords, this is the big one that folks worry about. They are really, really worried that if they're writing, that they are going to use the same language as somebody else and that will mean plagiarism, right? If you write from scratch, you will definitely use the same keywords and common phrases as the literature. That is okay. You are using your field's vocabulary and set phrases. That is not plagiarism. That is good academic writing. You are doing the right thing. Because you're not trying to paraphrase individual sentences, you are summarizing whole ideas from papers. You are not going to accidentally rewrite a whole sentence. It is virtually impossible for you to rewrite whole chunks of text in this way, unless you're one of those people that has one of those, but it's not one of those memories where you literally can look at a page and know the whole page off by heart straight away, in which case those folks need to work on different problems, but most of us don't have that problem, right? So if that is you, then yes, I can see why you might be worried about this. The rest of us are not going to remember word for word everything on a page, and we're not going to repeat it identically, right? Provided you are crediting where the ideas come from, you're fine. You are not going to end up rewriting whole paragraphs from scratch. Never copy paste, always write from scratch. And then you never ever have to have this worry. I hope this helps a little bit. I hate that people worry about this. And I think plagiarism checkers just really add an extra level of stress and worry. And then folks have issues where they put their work through a plagiarism checker at their university, and then their university uses the same plagiarism checker, and then their document gets flagged. I've heard stories like that. And that's just really frustrating. So yeah, if you never copy paste, you don't need a plagiarism checker. The other worry that folks have is about ideas, right? Those nice ideas that you have. What if somebody else has had that idea already? Is that plagiarism? It is definitely your job to make sure that you have read extensively and widely in your field so that you have a good sense when you write what needs to be credited and what's your own ideas. However, there's a lot of literature out there. No one is perfect. Missing a paper does happen. It is very common to have a citation pointed out during peer review. Very common. Papers don't get rejected for having missed one citation. Papers definitely get rejected for having not cited half the relevant literature, or having missed an absolutely pivotal paper in the field that nobody who works in that field would not have read, right? That's sure. But missing one citation for one little thing, it happens all the time. And in fact, it's one of those interesting, if you want to go and look up the amount of wrong citation that actually happens. So there's a lot that slips through a peer review in the citation land, a lot, which is bad. We're trying to work against that. But from the perspective of us worrying about being perfect, nobody's perfect. And sometimes an idea is ripe and ready. So more than one person is reading the same literature and is coming to the same conclusion. And this does happen, right? It's okay. It does happen. Sometimes it just people in different places are doing the same thing because it's the logical next step. And that's also not plagiarism. Obviously, we need to be ethical human beings and not be using these ideas to maybe get ourselves around things. So you wouldn't plagiarize if you've heard somebody talk about something. Obviously, you can't steal their idea. Like, I don't even need to tell you that. You're all reasonable, wonderful human beings. But this is the instant. Like sometimes the same idea does come up. It happens. So this isn't necessarily plagiarism. Do your best to read extensively. Do the best to know your literature. But it's not something, if you're worrying about this, you're an ethical person probably who doesn't need to worry, right? The people who blithely go on and do these terrible things are the ones who are the problem. Mariam's asking, how many words is considered plagiarism? That's one of those questions for which there isn't a clear answer. There isn't a clear line in the sand. And it depends very much on which section of an article we're talking about. And I would say folks who start worrying about this, that usually means what you're trying to do is start with a paragraph and then paraphrase it. And you're trying to work out how many words you need to change before it becomes your paragraph. Stop doing that. Stop paraphrasing. Write from scratch. And then we don't have to try and figure this out because there is no definite answer. What can be helpful in thinking about this is thinking about the concept of self-plagiarism. So that's when people use their own words in multiple articles. So the Committee on Publication Ethics says that this is something that journals should really consider on a case-by-case basis because it's quite difficult. You're not allowed to duplicate text between articles. Like you're not allowed, except you should generally avoid it. But sometimes there might be a little bit of text overlap in the intro and the methods. Particularly in the methods, sometimes there's a sentence or two that is the same. And in general, journals are told to you need to think about this. But in the methods, it might be fine that there's like one or two sentences that are the same between articles. Or maybe in the introduction, there's one or two sentences. It's not a good idea to have the whole introduction reproduced, but sometimes in the very general introduction. If they see duplication of your text in results and discussion and in hypotheses and objectives, that's when they start getting very, very unhappy because there's no good reason for that usually. And sometimes you'll see articles where clearly there's been a bit of what they call salami slicing, where somebody's got the same project and they've just taken half the results and put them into two different papers. But actually it means that the whole introduction and the whole method is identical. And then the discussion is very similar. And then that shows, actually, that should all be one paper. And that's called salami slicing, and it's bad. So if you find that that's what's going to happen with your two articles, that's a good indication that you actually need to write one article, not two. Awesome. So we have coming to the end. We've talked about what plagiarism and copyright are. We've talked about reusing other people's contents and their ideas, and how to avoid accidental plagiarism. And hopefully the next time you find a fantastic idea or image or quote that you'd like to reuse in your article, you feel comfortable navigating copyright and plagiarism, getting appropriate permissions, acknowledging creators, and that you do everything ethically and correctly. So I'm going to say thank you so much. And I'm going to suggest maybe, Natalie, if we pause the recording and we could maybe do some more questions.